Welcome and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. Traveling, something many of us want to do to get away from it all and maybe experience a whole new environment that will bring us perhaps a refreshing look at our lives and maybe some inspiration as well. Joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today is someone who embarked on that special journey after a date on OkCupid.com, which turned into a few weeks of 8 countries and no baggage to discover, well, there's probably a lot more than planning and the intention of being able to set forth and decide this is how my life is going to unfurl. The book is really a lot of fascinating fun. It's called No Baggage. It's a minimalist tale of love and wondering. And I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program our guest, Clara Benson. Clara, thank you for joining us here on the program today.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
It must have been very exciting to be out there doing what you were doing. And, you know, it's really interesting, and I wanted to actually start with quoting something out of your book that I think really helps the listeners to sum up this, because I found it to be, call it a fairly profound piece of, what would we want to say, sort of that philosophy of experience, if you may. So here it is. I'd have saved myself some heartache if someone had informed me that life isn't a linear technological climb that culminates in some final plateau. It tends to look a lot more like a rolling tumbleweed that gets blown off an arroyo cliffs and trapped in a barbed cow fences just as often as it rolls smoothly down the road. Now, when I think about that, I think to myself, I'll bet this little journey that you went on with Jeff must have really brought a lot of that experience into focus to where you realized life is as linear as you must have thought it was.
Definitely, yeah. When Jeff and I took off on that trip together, we decided from the very start that it was going to be an experiment. And as an experiment, you know, you don't know what's going to happen. And you have to be open to any number of things going wrong or not turning out like you expect. And I think that quote kind of speaks to the idea of not knowing what's going to happen, but being willing to set out and try it anyway.
I think what's interesting, too, is that a lot of us kind of have that fantasy of what you two did. Hey, let's just throw caution to the wind and see what life brings us. But our minds don't quite work that way, especially when we're in those moments saying to ourselves, well, this wasn't supposed to happen.
Yes, I think that's true. In this travel experiment, you know, we decided that we were open to things going wrong and being uncomfortable. So, you know, the parameters of our trip were that we were going to go from Istanbul to London with 3 weeks in between. No plans, no reservations, no hotels. We were going to stay with locals only. And like you said, also no baggage, which is a little twist we added right at the moment right before we took off on our trip. And so we were open to any number of things. We didn't know each other very well, so the relationship could have gone sour pretty quickly, or we might have discovered that traveling with no baggage was actually really miserable. So we were open to that happening when we took off.
Now, I think what's really good for the listeners to know about, too, is that there was a profound piece of advice that was given to you when you were at that point of uncertainty about this trip, and Jeff and the whole shebang, as you said, you hadn't really known each other very long, and all of a sudden you're whisking off to Europe. And that was that of regret. Tell us about what that experience was when somebody was sharing what it means to regret. I mean, this to me was like really sums up why we should do the things that we think we want to do.
Yeah, I mean, for me, there were a lot of reasons why I shouldn't have gone on that trip. I mean, I didn't know Jeff, the guy I took off with, very well, like I said, and I had just recovered from a rough period in my life and was just getting back on my feet. You know, trips are really expensive. But I had this just really strong feeling that I needed to say yes to the invitation and get on that plane, even though it didn't make sense. And I don't regret that at all. It turned out to be a really wonderful experience, and taking that risk, I think, was, it changed my life.
Now, how did you decide where to go? I mean, obviously you weren't planning, but you decided you had to start somewhere. How did you two come to the decision to go and start where you did and go to the places that you had?
Well, on my first date with Jeff, we were near the Texas State Capitol in Austin, and he mentioned that he had a summer trip planned, and he was going to go from Istanbul to London. So he kind of already had the basic framework for the trip. And then about 2 or 3 weeks later, it went from him going on this trip to us going on this trip together. And so that's what we started with, is just knowing that we were going to fly into Turkey out of the UK, and that was a route that he hadn't done before through the Balkans and Eastern Europe. And that was just kind of the random 2 points.
Now, what I like about the story is it's also a lot about how you began to stretch outside your boundaries and call them barriers that you grew up with. Tell us more about how it was growing up with your sense of your belief system, so to speak, and how a lot of times what you embarked on here stretched you outside of that.
Yeah, I grew up in a pretty conservative and traditional household. I was homeschooled throughout my whole education, all the way up to college, and so taking off on a trip like this, it was in some ways outside of my realm of experience, and it was. It was an incredible opportunity to challenge myself and what I knew about the world. I think I'm also someone who really struggles with anxiety and is very sensitive. So to throw myself into the situation where I didn't know what was going to happen or how I was going to handle myself or even where I was going to sleep that night, a lot of times we showed up in cities not knowing where we were going to stay, was a big opportunity for me to test my ability to move and flow with the moment, I guess you could say, to just be totally aware and present, and to make decisions following my gut intuition. And yeah, it was a tremendous growth opportunity.
Now, there was one scene that reminded me of an experience, excuse me, that a friend of mine and I had when we were down in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and that was when you were in Sarajevo, and you were on a bus that, as you said in the book, should have been retired in the Cretaceous age. Now, what's funny about that is I don't know why, because that story is different than the one I have, but as we were in Sao Paulo, this friend of mine, he was Hispanic, but he kind of had that elegant Spanish look, like he was a bullfighter. And because I didn't speak Portuguese too well, he says, why don't you hang out with me? You know, I mean, he kind of knew the language. I thought, why not? This good-looking Hispanic guy, he knows how to speak to the girls. You know, I've got it made, right? So one night we're actually, and it's funny how you see this a lot, but in at least the area we were, you tend to find homes that somehow have back doors out into an alley where they end up setting up tables and chairs. They literally kind of become bars. Is what they become. But basically, you're outside of somebody's house, and they have beer in the fridge, and you buy it from them, that sort of thing. We're sitting there at this table. It's night. It's probably around 11 o'clock at night, real quiet. The next thing you know, this big, I guess, garbage or rent truck or something comes barreling down the alleyway that we're in, and the truck is easily almost the width of the alley, it seems. He comes barreling toward us, and we're like, does he even realize we're sitting here? And we had the light on us the whole bit, and we stepped off. The next thing you know, this truck just slams the table with the beer that we had all over the alleyway. There's this guy hanging off the back for dear life. They barrel around the corner, they take out the street sign, and just disappear. And we just stood there looking at each other like, I wonder what would have happened if we just stayed in those seats. But you were having sort of those kind of crazy things happening to you. Not maybe to that degree, but pretty much.
We did. We had the way we were traveling set us up for interesting encounters, and we sure found them. Like the bus you referenced, we were on a bus crossing Bosnia at night, and the power kept going out, so the whole bus would just come to a halt in the middle of the highway with no lights. Which was completely dangerous. But the driver would get it cranked back up, and then we'd go on a little way, and then it would fall apart again. And that was pretty much how I saw most of Bosnia that night. But we did all kinds of things like hitchhiking, and we stayed with locals in almost every city. And so we came into contact with all kinds of characters, which I describe in the book in several scenes.
Now, what's even interesting, too, because you consider that you and Jeff have a relationship, but you seem to also have this feeling, well, it could be an open relationship. And that was sort of one of those things that tested your boundaries as well, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah. Every element of the trip was challenging in some way.
Do I have to eat that? Do I really have to sleep there? Are you sure this shower is real water?
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, so our relationship, I mean, we had just met. It was a matter of weeks when we took off on that trip together. And so naturally, as a modern couple, we said, well, we're going to model our relationship in the same way that we've modeled our trip, which is experimental, totally open. We're not going to do anything with, those pesky labels, and we'll just see what happens. And in my head, this is kind of this romantic, modern ideology for a relationship structure that I was all excited about it. But then, reality strikes, and the consequences of all that uncertainty become a little bit more real. And there's several moments on the trip where I'm thinking, maybe this wasn't such a great idea after all. So that's a real theme also in the story is how we negotiate the openness of our relationship as we're traveling together.
Well, I think that really, too, is a poignant part of the story, because I was reminded of a time in high school that I knew this girl, and we used to go out and do a lot of things together. And she was very attractive, but I never thought about her that way. She was really like this really cool friend that we just loved hanging out to, and she was actually engaged to be married. And as I was reading your story here, I sort of had that feeling about you and Jeff, like, if love happens, okay, but that's not really the feeling of the intention. Let's just see what it's really like to really get to know each other and how we really are in some very unique situations.
Yes, I agree. We went into that being open to discovering that we really didn't like each other, or that we were really well suited for each other. And I think travel or any kind of exploration together is such an amazing opportunity to figure out who someone really is, because you can't hide behind your masks or your makeup or however you are back home. You're in these stressful situations where you're lost, or you don't speak the language, you don't know where you're going to stay, and it's hard to just show the best version of yourself. And so I think Jeff and I, we basically hit the fast forward button on our relationship by taking this trip together. We discovered who the other person was very rapidly, and in our case, it turned out pretty good.
So how much did you two actually take on the trip? I know it was minimalist pretty much, but give us an idea how much you actually took on this.
Well, the night before we left, we sat on the carpet and put all of our things that we would maybe normally take on a trip in this pile, and then slowly started culling almost everything. Jeff ended up in a pair of bright red pants. He had his grandfather's cowboy hat, his glasses, and a striped shirt. And then he just had a notebook and a credit card, passport, half a toothbrush. He cut a toothbrush in half, and a couple charging cords, I think. And he stuck those in his back pockets, and that was it. And I actually ended up wearing a green dress. I don't know, I tried to find a good travel outfit, but I couldn't find one, and the whole premise was so ridiculous already that I thought, why not just wear a dress? So I did. And my dress didn't have pockets, so I had a little black purse that I put, I had a change of underwear, unlike Jeff, and toothbrush, deodorant, notebook, passport, maybe a few toiletries, and that was it for me.
Now, it was funny because there was one point where I was reminded of what it is like to be in other countries where perhaps people don't understand the English language as well as we would like them to. And you were talking about how you use hand gestures and you formulate, and you'll even take on the accent that they have, thinking that's going to help them understand what you're saying better.
Yeah, Jeff especially has this hybrid language that he speaks when he's traveling abroad. That you take out certain words and try to simplify to communicate in whatever way you can. And it comes out sounding ridiculous, but between hand gestures and basic words, you can get pretty far.
I like, if I may, I'm going to go ahead and quote another piece from the book because I found this to be so true. It gives us the feeling that this is how we think other people outside of the United States may think about us. And it says here, conversation was friendly if not limited. All we could collectively manage were basic English sentences supplemented by hand gestures and rudimentary jokes. Where am I from? I'm from Texas. Yes, George Bush is my neighbor. Yes, we ride horses to work, except on Sundays when we pray to Jesus, watch football, and fire up the barbecue. And it's really funny how people outside of the United States actually think and look at Americans, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean that section is kind of in jest. I don't know if they actually thought that, but I have met people abroad who have asked me if I know George Bush because I live in Texas, and I think a lot of it's just the media representation. They know about New York, they know about California, and they know about Texas, and not much in between. And I mean, I can say the same for how little I know about other countries too. It goes both ways.
Now, on this whole thing here, obviously, were you someone who went on a dating site before this?
No, this was my first time trying OkCupid. Like I said, I'd just come out from a rough period of my life that lasted a couple years, and I was looking for a way to kind of just get back out into the world and meet people, try to make some new friends. And so I thought, well, why not online dating? So that was the first time I ever created an account. And I found Jeff within 10 minutes of joining.
Now, I have to ask you, from this journey that you had here, we're starting from the OkCupid, meeting Jeff, to the point that the trip is finished. How would you say that your view of life and the world changed, if at all, after this experience?
Well, yeah, definitely. I mean, there's a very tangible change, which is after traveling through all of these countries with nothing, being open-handed and just very light. You hear the kind of the cliche saying of experience over things, belongings, stuff. But I experienced that in a very physical way. I didn't take anything back with me when we finished that trip, and except for just incredible memories. And that sense of lightness really made an impression on me, to the point that I came home and I got rid of almost half the stuff in my house. And I haven't brought any of it back, and I don't miss any of it. That sense of lightness, I've tried to incorporate it back into my daily life. And then I think on a more philosophical level, I've learned the importance of, at times, letting yourself be lost and uncertain, and that there's a power in that, in being able to throw yourself into a situation where you're not totally sure what's going to happen. As humans, I think we try to avoid those situations, but there's an art to navigating them, and all kinds of creative ideas and strange coincidences and interesting, events come out of these moments where there is some chaos and you're not sure what is going to unfold in front of you. So that's something I've also learned to actively welcome into my daily life back home.
I would also say, too, based on some of the things, and I don't really want to kind of clue the listeners in, I think they should read this and experience it for themselves, but you came to a point where letting go got easier, probably.
Yes, in many senses. Yes.
I mean, because you were just saying it now, like how you were able to leave all that stuff behind. And, when you think about our lives, especially here in the United States, we tend to be, call it materialist-driven, and I don't mean to say that as a bad thing, but once we accumulate something, it seems we spend so much energy holding on to it when it would take less, and actually we might even gain energy just by simply letting it go if it needs to go.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think there's also, we tend to get locked into an expectation of not just the physical things we should have, but how our lives are supposed to go, you know, like you climb the staircase and you hit off these check boxes and then you're all set. But I think life so rarely actually works that way, that being able to let go of the set expectation for how things are supposed to be is another really powerful tool.
It's such a fascinating story. You know, there was one point where I kept wondering, you know, you've only really seen this guy about 10 times or so. Then you get the plane tickets and you go on this journey. You know, you really can't totally know someone like that, and you kind of wonder, once you're over there in these new experiences, which new experiences, what they tend to do is also bring up our stuff, our baggage, whatever.
Yeah.
You know, and here you are. Did it ever get awkward being around him at all, or did you guys really feel like, you know, we're pretty well connected, and let's go ahead and just take this adventure by the horns, so to speak?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I get people that email me sometimes, and they say, well, do you recommend that people meet a stranger on the internet and then take off together with no baggage? And
I don't know about that. I mean, Dr. Hannibal Lecter's a great guy, nice, somebody you could have tea with, but I wouldn't want to hang out with him.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm cautious to say, yes, everyone should do what I did. I don't think that's true. But I can say that for myself, when I met Jeff that very first moment, and even in our emails before we met in person, I just had this really strong sense that there was something between us worth pursuing. And when we met in person, that is absolutely confirmed. And so I think if it had been someone else, I probably wouldn't have said yes to going on that trip with him. But the connection was so strong that I, like I said, I knew I needed to get on that plane, and I did. And of course, you know, while we're traveling, we're still getting to know each other, and we all have our idiosyncrasies and quirks. And so that took some adjustment. We're very different personalities, and there were moments where that clashed. But for the most part, we were able to find our rhythm together.
Now, for our listeners out there who begin to read this tale, and it's certainly a doozy, it's a lot of fun. I kind of like the way you write in such rich detail. You're obviously a writer. And because you're a writer, I'll bet there were a lot of times that you were very aggravated, that you felt like maybe you weren't getting enough alone time, as I know writers tend to want to have. Did that happen for you as well?
Yes. In terms of
look, I'm in the shower trying to figure out this Monet here. What are you doing? No, go ahead.
No, exactly. Jeff is my polar opposite. He's full of energy, and that energy starts at about 5 in the morning every day. Yeah, and he likes to just get up, pour the coffee, and run out the door. And he seeks out, you know, scenes that have a lot of chaos or color, people, things happening. And, you know, I enjoy that to some degree, but as a introvert and, as you say, as a writer, I have to have that quiet, alone time. And so that was one of the biggest challenges for sure on the trip, was just me feeling overstimulated and needing to rest and not talk to anyone, and him wanting to go out and seize the day. We had a couple arguments over what time we were heading out in the morning.
I could believe that. 5 o'clock would be too early for me.
Well, yeah, one of his philosophies is, his travel philosophies is that you should always try to see these world wonders where, you know, that are packed with tourists, to try to see them right when they open at dawn. So he managed to get me out of bed to see the Parthenon in Athens at dawn, and it really was, I have to say, it was incredible. We were the only people up there. You know, first thing in the morning, we had the entire Acropolis to ourselves at sunrise, and it's a moment I'll never forget. But there were other mornings where I did insist on sleeping in a little bit.
You know, I'm so glad you brought up the Acropolis, because there was that moment, you know, as you said, well, these are things that sometimes perhaps people traveling take for granted. We've got to go see this. Well, there it is, okay? You don't really get to feel sometimes perhaps that wow moment, like, here I am. I can't believe I'm standing here, in this area where it looked like it came from the original Star Trek series episode, where the guy was Adonis and he was a god, and I'm actually standing right here, and the Parthenon, as you're talking about. And I'll tell you, it's fascinating when you do get that opportunity of randomness to be in places that nobody else is, and you discover those wow moments that take your breath away. I had an example of that when I was in Italy, actually. It was in Naples. There I was wandering at night, which probably isn't a smart thing to do for an American on his own, but I was anyway. I start wandering down this roadway, and I noticed that down a ways, probably about 2.5 to 3 blocks, quite a ways away from me there, was kind of like a big area, like there was a cross-section there. And then, of course, to my left and right were at least 3 or 4 stories of windows. So I'm walking, not realize what I'm walking into is a huge enclosed area. Okay? So I finally get to this middle where it's basically a big cement tree plant stand or something like that. It's a big area here, this big intersection. And I sat down and I realized, wow, okay, so I came from here and it continues on that way, out that way, and then to my left or right was the same way, 2 or 3 blocks going to the right, with 3 to 4 story windows. Then I began to look up from where I was sitting in the middle and realized I was sitting underneath this tremendously huge dome.
Whoa.
And at each corner of this dome were these large stone statues with horns, and there were 2 at each corner, so that's a total of 8. And the sheer size of this particular thing. And the thing was, there wasn't another single human body in sight as I was sitting here taking this in. Now, in your experience, what was that breathtaking moment where you realized, this is just surreal?
Yeah, I love that feeling, and I think that's one of the joys of travel is especially when you stumble into it. You don't have your map out and your guidebook. Yeah, and you just stumble into that moment. Well, for me, I'm a huge archaeology buff, so the Parthenon was like a dream come true to see that. Another moment that was like that for me was when we were in Turkey in the first third of our trip. We took a train from Istanbul down along the western edge of the Turkish coast down to Izmir, which the woman we stayed with kind of called the Venice Beach of Turkey, kind of a bohemian culture there. And about 45 minutes away is the ruins of Ephesus, or Ephes, as they say in Turkey. And this was the largest ruin complex I've ever seen in my life, and it was in pretty pristine condition. It was Roman, Greek, and even Christian too. But they had a library, the Library of Ephes there, that they had reconstructed, and it was several stories high and just magnificent. And they didn't have, like in the U.S., they block off a lot of the wonders, so you can't climb on them. But here they didn't, and you could just jump on top of these ancient stones and pillars and explore, roam around, and it was just so surreal, and I'll never forget that.
Yeah, but what I was curious about is why you didn't get yourself the white Greek robe in the sand. You didn't post it all the way, maybe telling a Aesop's fable or something.
Oh no, actually Jeff did. There was a giant stadium, Roman stadium, where the gladiators used to fight, and he got down in there. He's an environmental science professor, and he gave a lecture to like the 10 people sitting in there, including me, and it was totally ridiculous, but it was a fun moment.
Now, I understand that you've actually made 4 subsequent trips South America, the Caucasus, Scandinavia, and Japan, and it's still the 2 of you out there doing it, huh?
That's right. Yeah, we've been all over the world now with no baggage, and we've got our system down pretty good. I'd say we're expert baggageless travelers now. Okay,
now that being said, for our listeners out there, what is it like to make an adjustment like that, and how different is traveling that way? I can already think of the obvious. It's probably a lot easier to get through airports. But What does it take for somebody to have to get to that level that they can actually be as open-handed as you two were about this idea of not taking very much with you on trips?
Right. Well, I will say that, again, this was more of a social experiment than like a practical way of traveling.
But you never know. I think there's a book here on traveling. I really do.
There could be, and I do think that minimalist travel, even if it's not quite as minimal as what Jeff and I do, it is a fabulous way to go because you're so much lighter. You don't have to keep an eye on all your bags from getting stolen, which takes a lot of your focus away from what's happening in the moment. And your shoulders are lighter, and there's less to think about. But I think some of the things that we've learned are that since you are bringing so little, that what you do bring needs to be high quality, especially shoes. Shoes are really important. I learned that the hard way on the first trip to Istanbul. I had to buy different sandals.
You also learned that on the Santiago Camino.
Oh, really? Yeah.
I think that's probably your next trip, right?
I would love to do that, yeah. So shoes are important. We also, on our second trip, learned the hard way that climate is something to consider ahead of time. We went to Ecuador and Peru, which for anyone who's been there, you know that there are so many different climate zones. And as it turned out, we had outfits, our one outfits, that were appropriate for exactly half of those climate zones and totally inappropriate for the other half. So we were in the Atacama Desert with our Andes Mountains hiking boots, and it was miserable. So if you are going to do a minimalist trip that goes through different climate zones, it's wise to know in advance that you're gonna have to adjust sometime on the road, either warmer or cooler, whatever it might be. And then a bottle of concentrate soap is your best secret weapon, I think, something that can be used to wash clothes, to wash hair, face, anything that you need to clean. That's what I always bring.
And always have the grape Jolly Ranchers available, correct?
Sure, why not?
That's a little joke that you have to read the book No Baggage to know what we're talking about here. So, Clara, it's been a pleasure to have you here on the program. We love bringing on, I guess, stories about people who do trips, from something that you don't tend to hear a lot. For instance, we had a guest some years back was talking about how to enjoy vacationing in the hot zones around the world.
Wow.
Hey, it's kind of neat if you're in a place like war-torn Iraq, where you can stay at a 5-star hotel for $5 a night.
Oh, wow.
That's if you don't mind the bombs dropping outside your windows. So, So anyway, is there a website people can find out more?
Yeah, you can go to my website, www.clarabenson.com, and that's Benson with the E-N, B-E-N-S-E-N. You can see pictures from my trips from all over the world and find out how to get in contact and order the book.
And I just have to ask, where are you off to next?
Well, I've never been to the African continent, so Jeff and I are talking about possibly going to Morocco and Western Sahara. Well, we shall see.
There you go. Leap from that rock of Gibraltar.
Yeah.
Clara, thank you so much for being with us here on the Beyond 50 radio program.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. We want to thank you, the listeners out there. Again, the book is No Baggage. Our guest today, Clara Benson. You can also discover more about Beyond 50 at beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50. Sign up for our weekly e-news updates. Be sure you stay in touch with what's going on out there. You can also follow us on Twitter at Beyond 50 Radio as well as Facebook. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in. This is the Beyond 50 radio program. And remember, live your day past halfway.